Hiya, and welcome to my first non-animated video. This is sort of just an extra video between my main D&D stories, and since it's not animated, you can fold your laundry or something while listening to me talk about tabletop RPG systems for far too long. First, I'll go over the things I like about Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and chief among these is the character customization. It's honestly kind of crazy how many different types of characters you can make with this system. If you have basically any character idea, it's probably possible to make them. I once made a half-vampire, half-ratfolk swashbuckler that could teleport between shadows to get up close to the enemies, and he had a ghost that constantly haunts him, and that's using only official content without any homebrew. Hell, even if two of your level 1 players both choose to make human fighters, they will probably have very different characters and playstyles from each other, and I absolutely love it. You get a bunch of different feats and abilities that you can choose between for your class and ancestry, but it's typically only 1 or 2 choices per level, and you only have to choose between a handful of options each time, so it isn't as overwhelming as it might initially sound. Personally, I found character creation to be fairly simple, and once you get it down, it is so satisfying every single time I sit down to make a new character. One big problem I have with D&D 5e is that if you multi-class at all, then you are permanently locked out of the highest tier abilities for your class, and in most cases you are also just straight up weaker than everyone else in your party. This has always been a big problem for me because I love multi-classing. Luckily, Pathfinder 2nd Edition mostly fixes this problem by instead having multi-classing work where you get to trade out some of your main class feats in exchange for specific feats and abilities from your multi-class at certain levels, though you are still actually leveling up in your main class, so you won't be behind the rest of the party. There are around 40-something other options using this system that aren't multi-class archetypes, such as Pirate, Arcane Archer, and so on, which is so nice that anyone can make their character just that much more unique and fun if they want to. Now onto the combat section, which similar to Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition is a major part of the system. The first thing you'll notice is the 3-action combat system. Instead of having a movement, a standard action, a bonus action, and so on, you just get 3 actions that you can do whatever with. I really like this system, and I've definitely found that it makes combat feel more dynamic and like you have a lot more choices on your turn. Most people I've heard talk about the system online have said that the 3-action system is their favorite change to combat. And while I agree that it's nice, I personally much prefer the changes to weapons, flanking, and criticals, so I should probably talk about those now. First off, almost every single weapon is unique to the others, and they all have a bunch of different traits and stuff that differentiate them, such as Deadly, where you deal extra damage on criticals, Trip, where you can use the weapon to trip opponents, and so on. This once again gives you even more character customization if you want it, or you can just take whichever one sounds the coolest and it'll still be really effective because the balancing in this game is pretty great as well. Now onto the changes to flanking and criticals that I mentioned earlier. The way the flanking works is if an enemy is flanked, then they gain the flat-footed condition, which means that their AC is reduced by 2. And you're probably thinking, alright then, that's nice I guess, but I don't really see why that's important enough to be mentioned here. And if that was all, then I'd agree with you, except this also synergizes with the new way that criticals work. In Pathfinder 2nd Edition, if you get 10 above the enemy armor class, then that attack becomes a critical hit, though a natural 20 can turn a normal hit into a critical even if it normally wouldn't be one. This means the AC reduction from flanking makes you more likely to hit and more likely to crit, so flanking is extremely helpful and is definitely a thing to prioritize in combat, which leads me to my absolute favorite change in the entire system. Not everyone has attacks of opportunity. Now there are only a handful of enemies and player characters that actually have the attack of opportunity ability. This means that you can actually move around the battlefield without having to worry about taking 10 opportunity attacks just to go heal the investigator who ran too far ahead into a swarm of undead at the very end of a high-level dungeon, even though the rest of the party rolled terribly on initiative and he knew he wouldn't have any backup, so I don't know what he was thinking, and I think I've gotten a bit off track. Anyway, as I was saying, all of this ties together to make combat way more enjoyable, at least for me. Now onto the miscellaneous rule changes that I like. First, we have the absolute most important rule ever, of all time, and that is that fall damage is capped at 750. Never, ever forget this rule, and when teaching new people about the system, this should be the very first thing you tell them. Though in all seriousness, the only big rule change that I can think of is the new weight system, where you have a maximum amount of bulk you can carry and every item is assigned an amount of bulk. All of the numbers are way smaller and more manageable than the usual mess that would be calculating the number of pounds you're carrying, and I absolutely love the bulk system for encumbrance. The last thing I want to talk about before moving on to the flaws is Paizo's release schedule, and holy shit, they're releasing so many books, I love it. It's only been a year and a half since the system launched, and they've already released over 20 new ancestries, 4 new classes with 4 more coming this year, hundreds of new monsters, and 5 full campaigns. It's fucking amazing, and the best part is that all of the rules, monsters, and character options are online for free on the official SRD for the system. Which makes it a lot easier to help convince new people to try out the system because they can make any character they want without having to invest any money into buying books. And also, even though they are releasing so much content so fast, it's still really high quality. For example, every single monster and NPC stat block in the game has its own interesting abilities that differentiate it from the others. Like for example, the owlbear has an ability where it runs into the middle of the party and unleashes a blood-curdling screech. So now the entire party has to make saving throws or start fleeing in terror. Now the party's composition is all messed up and they have to try to get back into positions while trying to deal with this monster. This means that no matter what or who the players are fighting or interacting with, they're gonna have something fun and unique happening that differentiates it from the other encounters. Now that I'm done fanboying over the system, it's time to talk about the things I don't like about it. The first partial flaw for the system is that character creation does take longer than 5th edition, especially the first level. It's not too big of a problem when I start a new campaign at first level and you level up once every so often, because then every level is exciting because you get to make some choices and they are spaced far enough apart that you don't have to do too much work at any one point in time. The problem is that I feel really bad when a higher level character dies in this system, because now the player needs to spend like an hour or more of their life to go make a new 8th level character and it just kinda sucks. And I can't really think of any ways to fix this without them having to reduce the character options, which would get rid of one of the coolest parts of the system. While this isn't even close to a system-breaking issue, it does slightly hurt my preferred style of playing, which I'll get to in a second, but first we need to talk about math. So if you've seen any videos talking critically about this system, you've probably heard that there is too much math. And while some of the videos heavily exaggerate the problem, I do kind of agree slightly. Usually it's not too bad, especially at early levels when it's a lot of really nice and small numbers for attack bonuses and stuff. And because most of the math is done before combat, so you already have your 3 attack bonuses written down and you just need to know which one to use. However, once the numbers start getting larger and you've got a bunch of status effects on people that give them modifiers and stuff in combat, it gets a bit tricky to keep track of it all, though that might just be a problem with organization on my side. Then for my biggest problem with the system, the fact that your level is added to your proficiency bonus. Now this isn't entirely a problem, and in fact it helps part of the system. Like for example, the players feel like badasses who can completely wipe the floor with low-level enemies, and also you can actually have boss fights consisting of only one enemy and still have it be a challenge for the party. However, if you've been watching my channel for a while, then you probably know that I absolutely love using a pack of low-level enemies like goblins or kobolds against a high-level party. I sort of just have the kobolds run around using ambush tactics and traps to try to terrify the players, but I can't really do that in this system, because kobolds have like a +5 to hit, and a level 10 player is going to have an armor class of around 30 or something like that. So the kobold has basically no chance of actually hitting the players or doing anything to them. This also ties into my favorite style of playing tabletop RPGs, the Western Marches campaign. These work where you get 20 or so players, and each session a group of 4 of them go out into the wilderness to explore some new area or check out a dungeon they discovered a while back or something like that. The thing about this style campaign though is that the parties can wander into zones designed for different levels than they currently are. In some other systems this isn't too big of a problem, but with how finely tuned the math is for Pathfinder 2nd edition, it kind of becomes a bit of a mess. If they wander into a slightly lower level zone, they just completely wipe the floor with the enemies and it's boring for them. And if they go into a higher level zone, they just get deleted by the enemies and it's also not fun. You might try to argue that I should use the variant rule of proficiency without level from the Game Mastery Guide. But from what I've read online, it sort of breaks parts of the system, and also I'll then have to modify every enemy's stat block to be adjusted for this, and that feels like it would be a lot more work. So take all of this with a grain of salt, because I haven't actually tried this variant rule yet, so I can't confirm if this is the case, though I definitely want to give it a shot sometime and see how it works out. Overall, I still absolutely love the system, and I'd recommend you at least give it a shot, especially because all of the rules are free online. I'll put a link to the SRD in the doobly-doo. Though also if you don't like the system, that's totally fine. Don't base your opinions of a system off of the ramblings of a random person on the internet. Play whatever systems you enjoy, and don't let other people's thoughts on a game ruin your enjoyment of it. Because all that matters is that you and your friends have a good time. Anyway, that's been my thoughts on Pathfinder 2nd edition, and I'd love to hear your opinions in the comments below.